As an engineer, Frank Crossley created metals that were stronger than steel, but much lighter. The irony is, doing that as a black man in the 1960s meant that he needed a fortitude that was stronger than steel, but with a touch that was much lighter. Frank Crossley grew up on the south side of Chicago. His father was a train porter. His mother worked in a button factory. During World War II, he entered a school that trained naval officers. He was the only black man in a class of 1,500. How do you feel about that situation?
My fear gene seems to be very weak.
In the early years, the U.S. Navy had black sailors. 25% of the Navy was black at the end of the Civil War, but then Jim Crow kicked in. Armies can segregate on land. Ours did. Navies can't, so they segregated by job category. For 80 years, black men were only allowed to be cooks and butlers for white officers. Frank was part of a program to test whether white men would take orders from black officers. He was put in charge of a crew that fueled and painted a ship bringing troops back home after the war. As that work began, he set something straight in his mind.
When I joined the Navy, I decided that if I heard the N-word and it was not directed to me, I would not take offense. I would only take offense if it was directed to me.
After the war, Frank went to the Illinois Institute of Technology, where he became the first black man in America to earn a PhD in metallurgical engineering. At about that time, President Kennedy signed an executive order that told companies and universities that they had to take affirmative action to wipe out racial segregation. Here's how that played out for Frank Crossley. IIT had a research institute, which had a department for metals research. Frank interviewed for 2 leadership jobs there.
I got offers from both supervisors who interviewed me. And then I learned that at the executive level, someone had turned down my employment.
Frank told the president of the college, John Retaliata, and while Frank was sitting there, Retaliata called to find out what was going on. Frank heard the person on the phone say it was because Frank was black.
And he said, "You can't do that because we are an equal opportunity employer." And that was the first time I'd heard the expression equal opportunity employer.
Frank was made the head of the IIT Metals Research Department. The most important thing he did there was develop something called Transage. It was lighter than steel, but you could heat it to 6 times the strength of steel. That's great for missiles. Konrad Dannenberg was one of the Germans who created the American space program.
Once you have ignited your rockets, your rocket combustion temperature is much higher than the melting temperature of steel. So even if you build your rocket from steel, it has a tendency to melt through and to have a big hole in your rocket engine.
But that didn't happen with the metal that Frank Crossley invented. It was also great for submarines because it wouldn't rust. Frank worked on the Trident submarine and also on the Poseidon. Now, I'm not going to lie, it wasn't all rosy. Twice, in the 1950s and in the 1970s, Frank said he got the same answer when he asked a supervisor about a promotion.
He said, "Yes, a promotion for you is long overdue, but because you are so advanced for a Negro, we thought you were content."
Frank Crossley always worked to stay as close to white people as the law and custom would allow. He did this for a reason. He was always mindful that he could prove by example the absurdity of superstitions about the other race.